This is the Unregistered podcast, and I'm Thaddeus Russell. This is a show about ideas, people, and behaviors that are considered inappropriate, out of bounds, or beyond the pale. The things you're not supposed to talk about if you're a school teacher, a college professor, a businessman, a politician, a parent, a neighbor, or even a podcast host. These are the things you're not supposed to say or even think if you're a good liberal, a good conservative, or a good citizen. Each week, I'll interview a person who has something bad to say. They might be a journalist or a professor. They might be a porn star or a drug dealer. They might just be an ordinary person with an ordinary job who doesn't care about the rules of polite society. I'm not interested in breaking the rules just to be a troublemaker. I'm interested in people who break the rules of conventional thought and to expand the scope of what is possible to say in our society. I'm interested in people who make me think. At Unregistered Chicago, we in attendance had the rare pleasure of witnessing two public intellectuals from radically different points of view have a discussion, perhaps a debate, about contemporary politics. And now you can too. This is my interview with Batya Ungar-Sargon and Curtis Yarvin. Thank you for that. Well, here we are with an interesting combination of people here. So Batya and I were just talking, and Curtis was in the audience listening, and I guess I just want to start by asking Curtis what he thinks.
Well, I guess I would start by saying that Carlyle was definitely not alive in 1912, but actually I think you could do fairly well in an English department by borrowing from him, since no one will have read him, and no one will be able to tell that you're stealing stuff from the past and putting a slightly new, coat of paint on it. If you have to do, I'm not recommending that anyone get a degree in English literature, but that I think you could probably get away with. I think my more general response is, and this is a response that I have to a lot of people who sort of seem to come from what you might call sort of an IDW type perspective, which is that they're in general, like I think Batya, they're sort of attached to a certain current set of values, and they have this sort of map of history which has this kind of fishhook shape where it basically goes straight toward, righteousness, and then sort of weirdly turns around and heads back toward darkness in this strange way. And I think that one of the reasons that's not sort of my map of history, and I think where that comes from often is people they combine a very acute and accurate sense of the present with remaining attached to the narrative of how we got here. And so you have this sort of straight thing that's kind of straight in the past. And if you follow sort of the let's say the standard woke narrative of today, it sort of continues going straight all the way, right? And if you imagine being an alien, sent into this world, and all you have is this material in which it goes in a straight line, it's really, it takes a while, it takes a lot of work to notice that, no, wait, it's actually going like this, right? Or even like that. And that's a project that is hard to escape from, as you spoke of it almost like escaping from cult indoctrination or something like that. And I think that's very, very right in a lot of ways. But I think it's also important to remember that when you see the sort of degree of distortion in the present, that is just almost statistically unlikely to be a new thing. And so when you're basically, taking this relatively unquestioned map of the past that you're interpreting sort of literally from the same tradition, and then you're noticing a deviation in the sort of the current era, what you're much more likely to be looking at is something that's more like that. And that you're really, really, really deeply off in your narrative of the past. And, you know, when you're sort of, actually, you know, like later in your talk, you sort of gave some hints of this. So have you read a book called The Romance of American Communism by Vivian Gornick?
No.
This was recently republished by NYRB. It came out in the 70s, and it's basically a description of growing up in essentially a red diaper baby, you know, household in the 70s. And of course, because it's written in the 70s, the author, Ms. Gornick, who basically fell out of Marxism and became, or communism, or whatever we want to call it, progressivism, let's say progressive, who fell out of progressivism, and my grandparents who were American communists always said progressive. They would never use the word communist in front of me. It wasn't because I was a blogger. It was just that was their natural habit. You know, and the word progressive, actually, interestingly enough, is even found in the Venona dispatches, which are basically you know, encrypted cables from NKVD and GRU agents in the United States.
Wow.
And going back to the Soviet Union, and when they want to indicate that someone is a fellow traveler or an ally of the party, they say progressive.
That's so interesting.
Like the word hasn't really changed since, like, you go back far enough and it's like Teddy Roosevelt, right? You know, so it's sort of a broad, you know, it's much broader in like the teens, but you don't really get it being used except as like to mean like part of the movement. You know how they said movement with a capital M in the 60s, right? And so you have this like very, very deep continuity. And one of the things that you see, for example, in the Gornick book is like cancel culture is just in full swing.
Yeah.
In the 70s in American communism, and you have a family history of this. Gornick's, I mean, this is an oral history basically, so it's like Studs Terkel style.
Right.
So it's really freaking awesome. And then you can go back even further. There's this wonderful book. Have I mentioned this to you? Bella Dodd, School of Darkness.
No.
So Bella Dodd was a Brooklyn school teacher. She was Italian. My grandmother was Jewish, but they were almost the same thing, kind of in a way, in that area at that time. And so basically, they were both communist school teachers in New York City public schools. Now, Bella Dodd did somewhat better than my grandmother, at least in her party career, and rose actually to the point where she was on the U.S. Politburo. And, you know, in case you didn't know that the U.S. had a Politburo, think again. And the U.S. Politburo was led by, you know the name Earl Browder?
No.
Browder, you know Browder. So Browder was the long-term head of the CPUSA, and he was basically, well, of course he was a loyal servant of Moscow. You had to be like the Shachtmanites and Trotskyites and all these other scum, you know, Lodestonites.
Talking about my parents, man. You're right. They are scum, actually.
They're backsliding.
It's okay. They're scum.
Thank you.
No problem.
I must have misheard something then.
No problem.
But yeah, you know, so, and the party line, you know, early in the Roosevelt administration had been like these are social fascists, like we have to like, you know, the sort of the splitting the left had been the party line. And then in the mid-30s, Stalin comes out with the program with the Popular Front. And the Popular Front is basically instructing all the orthodox Marxist-Leninist parties of the world to like unite and make common cause with New Dealers and, you know, previous social fascists, et cetera, et cetera. And so Earl Browder is kind of the architect of this strategy, or the manager of this strategy in the U.S., and he's a very, not Jewish actually, very charismatic Midwestern, in case you were wondering.
Yep.
Which
was important, that he was not Jewish.
It certainly, I mean, even as late as toward the end of World War, this is something else in the comments on anti-Semitism. I saw a poll, and I really believe this from the period, if you asked Americans around like even 1945, if they like Jews or not, like 90% of them would be like, no, I don't really like Jews.
Well, especially in 1945.
Sure, but like that's a very odd thing. Like you're winning the war for
Jews.
Well, no, it's not the war for Jews, but
well, they were told they were.
Well, no, they actually weren't.
Well,
no, that was the
by
German
45.
line.
Yeah, right.
Hitler was saying it
later.
was a war about Jews.
That's right.
No, it was much later.
Later, yeah, that's right.
Actually, like, no, it's not mentioned in
yeah,
propaganda
you're right.
at all. And it's all about Hitler taking over the world.
Yep, totally.
Which, yeah. Well, yeah, it's a slightly less like, like the later reason we had for doing it, which wasn't the reason at the time, was the better reason. So there was that. But in any case, Bella Dodd, getting back to the story of Bella Dodd, so she's a Browderite. She's one of Browder's people on the Central Committee. And then Browder, after the war, as like Stalin goes into his Cold War strategy, he's like, no, now we're going back to being the enemy of the social fascists. He's basically like, all these New Dealers really thought during World War II that like Stalin would be the strong right arm and help him rule the world. They really believed this United Nations thing was going to work, and it just didn't. And because Stalin didn't want to be anyone's suka, I think they say in Russia. And so Browder has to get purged. And he gets purged through something called the Duclos letter, which is just like Stalin could purge someone by having a letter written in an Orthodox communist journal in Paris. So Browder has to go, and the Browderites also have to go, and the Politburo has to be cleansed of these deviationists, right? And so Bella Dodd has to be purged. And the interesting thing about the way they purge Bella Dodd is that they basically accuse her. Now, the word racist was not even used at the time. They said white chauvinist. They accused her of being racist to her Puerto Rican building superintendent in a secret kangaroo Communist Party court. So basically, this thing of like being sort of accused of this like offense against group narcissism, that has happened all over the world, all over the country now. You had to be on the Politburo for that to happen to you. And so this is a sort of deep and old tradition, and it's really. Let me give you another example, which may resonate as someone who's in English literature. So you might know the name John Dos Passos.
He's going to spend the rest of the hour showing how few books I've ever read in my entire life.
So he did this. It's okay. He did this yesterday to Ben too. Yeah.
Let me just put you at just assume I have read nothing, because I am a deeply ignorant person. So just assume I have read nothing, and I'll let you know if I have read any of the books you mentioned.
Dos Passos, the reason I mention him.
I actually have heard of him,
yes,
but
yeah, he gets assigned in high school a lot. And Dos Passos and Hemingway were good friends, and Dos Passos